Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to this conference on Standards, Your Innovation Bridge, organised by Senelec with the support of the European Commission and EFTA. My name is Jackie Davis, and contrary to the headset mic you see, what we call a Madonna, and the music, I'm not going to dance for you today. You'll be relieved to hear, but I am going to be the Master of Ceremonies at all our plenaries today and the moderator of panel debates this morning and this afternoon, and then acting as a provocateur in some of the breakout sessions. I'm going to tell you more about the programme for today in a minute, but before I do that, let's watch a little video to tell you more about the topic we are here to discuss. Let's see that video.
Throughout history, all kinds of human activity have benefited from standardization. In 1840, for example, standardized time, GMT, was adopted by several British railway companies to coordinate train timetables. 5 European countries then agreed on a standard gauge for railway tracks, which made it easier to transport people and goods. At the beginning of the 20th century, the paper industry accepted standard paper sizes to the benefit of both manufacturers and consumers. After the Second World War, mass production boomed, so standards became necessary to guarantee the quality and safety of products. Standardized formats, such as those for freight containers, enabled the huge growth in international trade. Elsewhere, standards were agreed that facilitate manufacture and use of essential products. In the 1980s, environmental considerations were increasingly taken into account in European standards. Over the years, these have evolved to reflect the current concerns of society, such as the health and safety of children, and to accommodate scientific innovations, such as nanotechnology. But, above all, standards are there to simplify our lives. Join us to learn more about how standards support innovation and competitiveness in Europe at the CEN and Senelec conference on October the 30th, 2014.
And thank you very much for heeding that invitation and joining us today. Before I introduce our opening speaker, I just want to tell you a little bit more about the programme for today. This morning, in a moment, we're going to hear a welcome address and then a keynote speech to inspire you, to set some context for our discussion, and there will be an opportunity for questions after that. Then I'm going to ask you some questions. We're going to get you to work. You were given these little voting cards on your way in your pack. You will need them at various intervals throughout the day. After that, we're going to have a panel discussion where we're going to talk in more detail about how standards can contribute to innovation, what you need to do if you want to take advantage of those benefits, and why this issue is so important. Again, in that session, there won't be any speeches. It will be very interactive, and I will be coming among you with a microphone to take your questions and indeed your comments, your ideas. We very much want to hear from you today, as well as from our eminent speakers. Then before lunch, we'll also get a European perspective. How does this fit into the EU policy horizon? Then, after lunch, we will have a series of breakout sessions, 3 at a time on different topics. You have on your badge, I'll give you more information about all of that later on. We'll then come back here for a closing panel to hear from the moderators of those sessions, how you got on, and to discuss those outcomes briefly. And then we'll end the day with some final reflections of what we've said and heard. So that's it. A couple of housekeeping notes, if I might. We have a packed agenda, so could I start by asking where we have keynote speakers, asking them to stick to the times allocated for their presentations, and to forgive me if I firmly, but I also hope gently, remind them when their time is up. The Twitter hashtag, for those of you who like to tweet, hashtag InnoBridge14. If anything does come in, if you're one of those people who prefers to tweet your question or comment rather than put your hand up, we have somebody in the room, Ben Carlin over there, who is moderator, going through Twitter, and from time to time I will go to Ben and see what is coming in from the Twitter sphere. Scribing. You see Mariella over there with her magnificent wall. As we talk, as issues are discussed, she's going to draw it for us. She's going to give us a graphic representation of what is coming out of the discussion. So keep an eye on her activities over there. And lastly, just to mention, you've already seen the exhibition in the coffee and lunch area. That is the place where you can go and see some showcasing of projects that have used standards to support and stimulate innovation. If you want to know how it works in practice, you can go and talk to them and find out all about their experiences. So, that's enough housekeeping notes. It's now my great pleasure to give the floor to Scott Steedman, who is SEN's Vice President for Policy and Director of Standards at the British Standards Institution, to welcome us more formally. Scott, over to you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for that warm introduction. This is a marvellous occasion. I'm just delighted to see that we've filled this hall to capacity. 500 people registered for this really important meeting today. I thought I would welcome you by reflecting on Europe's challenge. Last Monday, I sat with the mayor of Shenzhen, a city near Hong Kong in China, which is over 17 million people. And 30 years ago, it was a fishing village. Our interview was to last 30 minutes, but it extended to over an hour because his enthusiasm for the role of standards to drive his city to become one of the greatest cities in the world was quite extraordinary. So we realized we had a common philosophy of the role of standards in building cities, building the future. And he reflected that what he wanted in Shenzhen was a strategy for standards for the next generation of his city. Bear in mind, Shenzhen is bigger than any city in Europe and has achieved that growth in just 30 years. Now the mayor himself was looking for a standards strategy for the next 30 years. A strategy that he said, of course, was about quality, but not the quality of products and safety of products that we heard in this excellent introductory video. No. He wants a standard strategy for quality of life, for quality of the environment, to a greener city, a smarter city, for quality of employment, for a more innovative city. He really gets it. So our job today is for us to get it as well, that this is not about the past. It's not just about the importance of product quality and safety. This is about the future. So let me just expand by saying what I feel about standards. Standards are really very simple. They are just a consensus of what good looks like. They're a consensus brought together by those stakeholders. They are enablers for business and industry. Why would they be anything else? Why would we want standards that were a barrier to anything at all? Standards have to be there to enable business, to unlock business potential. You think of the healthcare sector. Standards provide a framework for consumers to choose between the higher performing institutions and the less well-performing institutions. In construction, standards provide a framework to bring together that information from the built environment, information that will feed our future cities' models. And in new technology, standards will drive smart cities. They'll drive autonomous vehicles. They'll drive new and emerging fields like synthetic biology, which I was discussing in London just yesterday. Standards in this realm build trust. They build trust with the investors as well as with the public. So the extraordinarily successful model that we have in Europe, the sophisticated system that allows us to bring together one single standard that be used across 34 countries, is quite unchallenged in the world. And we can build on that for the next generation. In the session today around intellectual property, I would just comment that, to me, standards are the opposite side. They are the flip side of intellectual property. You need both. But we don't do enough to educate people that standards are simply about sharing knowledge of what goods looks like, as opposed to protecting knowledge. And SMEs and companies across Europe need to balance what their strategy is towards intellectual property with what their strategy is towards the use of standards. Standards, therefore, accelerate innovation. That's the way we want to use them. We want you to see them as an accelerator for innovation through a timely consensus that shortens the innovation cycle. Standards increase the probability of success. Of course, you can innovate without standards. You can do it in your garden shed. But if you want to increase the probability of success, you should be using standards because you will be sharing your ideas with others, with your consumers, your market, your suppliers, your potential regulators, your competitors. And all of that will increase your probability of success. My second major point this morning is just to reflect that innovation today is now a social process. This brings us full circle to that essential quality of the standard tool, that standards are developed by communities as a way to understand what good looks like. Back in the end of the 19th century, it was about time and railway tracks, and later product safety and product quality. But now today, it's not just about products and processes, it's about people. Standards will unlock the potential of behaviors in organizations, that third and uncharted generation of standards, where we will look to see the discretionary performance of our staff delivering new advantage for our businesses and organizations. We talk about people organizations. If there are people organizations, there must be standards of good practice to help those people deliver their potential to unlock your business. So standards emerged out of that transition from a craft industry to mass production, a convenient tool to enable businesses to exchange their requirements. But standards have become the knowledge fuel for modern business and industry, for products and, of course, for services. No business anymore produces simply products. Everything we do is a service. And now, of course, stakeholder engagement is the key to innovation. Stakeholders shape the pathways and they become enablers for the business. You must think of standards, for example, in the health sector for care homes. Standards will drive the performance of those care homes and enable consumers to improve their choice. Innovation is no longer a matter of simply transferring industrial technology, but the broader organizational, economic, and social embedding of those new technologies in a development environment. The take-up of innovation, as I say, is now a social process, and we need to reflect on that as we think of our next generation of standards. For all of those reasons, 100 years on from the first introduction of standards in the European context, the role of standards must also evolve. The structure of formal standards making that we have in Europe is sophisticated and it's successful. It's already here. The challenge for us is how to use it to drive performance improvement across European industry. So in your deliberations and discussions today, I would urge you to leave your traditional perspective of standards at the door and think about the future. Welcome to the future. Thank you very much.
Scott, thank you so much. So, and thank you very much also for starting with that international perspective, how other global players are seeing this issue, and not only in terms of responding to societal challenges, but also our competitors. So how do standards give you that competitive edge in the world? One issue I hope we will come back to. And that key role, I like very much that phrase, standards are a consensus of what good looks like. I hope we'll come back to that later in the discussion. And that emphasis at the end on them as enablers and how to use them to the maximum. They're all issues we will explore in more detail later. So thank you very much, Scott, for getting us off to such an inspiring start. It is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Christian Reinaudo, who is CEO of Agfa-Gevaert, who is going to talk about the secret ingredient for a successful innovation strategy, inspiration from the industry. So, Christian, a very warm welcome to you, and over to you.
Thank you, Kerry. Let me tell you first that I'm not an expert of standards. I'm just a CEO, so as CEO you're an expert of nothing. But you try to put the different ingredients together to develop a strategy of a company, and standardization, I believe, like quality, like innovation, are critical elements of any definition of a strategy for an international company. Let me first make a little bit of advertisement on this company that I lead, Agfa-Gevaert, and that will be the first 2 slides only, don't worry. So this is a company which has been on Earth for 150 years, mainly driven by the film business, like the Kodak and the Fuji, and organized over 3 business groups, which are dealing with the graphics industry, the healthcare industry, and let's say a group of specialties in chemistry. Graphics and healthcare are highly regulated and standardized industries. So I believe that I will be able to take a few examples of the standards that we have developed or we participated in developing to make sure that these industries could reach a global scale. It's about 11,000 people in 40 countries in the world, but we operate in 40 countries. Of course, we are present in all the markets of the world. 3 billion euro of revenues, 150 million of R&D, so it's 5%. In Belgium, it's the 4th company in terms of R&D investment. And more importantly, and starting from that point, I will just insist on the topic of today. That means innovation and standardization. We have 940 alive patent family. A patent family, you know what it is. It's a patent which, in fact, is in different countries, so you call it a family. And in Agfa, generally, we cover 10 countries, which are the most important markets. And for these patents are, as you will see in a few minutes, in all the activities of the group. And these patents are a fundamental element of the success, the future success of the company. These patents, I was saying, are basically in all activities of the group, but I would like to highlight a few things. You see, healthcare is about 40% of the business, and it's about 40% of our patents. The graphics industry, you see there are 3 different elements. It's about also 40 to 45%, and the chemistry is 10%. So what does that mean? It means that we have a shift in our patent portfolio, and we will see that in a few minutes, from the traditional imaging business into the IT world for healthcare. And we have a shift from the traditional offset technology in graphics into the inkjet and software. So patents in a company which is transforming itself obviously follows the need of your innovation. Patents are also following the way a company breathes. And obviously the external factors, mainly economy, are not without influence on the way you patent your innovation. And as you can see here, the golden time of the film business in the early 2000s, the company was basically patenting something like 100 patents a year. And suddenly, with the big digitization of most of our activities and the lack of creativity in these domains, our patent family creation dropped down to a level which was a third of what it was before in the years 2008 and 2009. And then we said, look guys, if we just go on this way, we are dead. So we need to react. And so when I became CEO of this company in 2010, and I fostered the innovation and patented innovation. Patent leading to standardization, because without these kind of things, you cannot be a global player. And then we started to put targets on the innovators of the company, and we started to redevelop the patent portfolio. And you see that last year we basically filed almost 100 patents, and this year will be probably above 100 patents. So why do I speak so much about patents and innovation? Because I don't think that you can speak about standardization without talking about innovation and patents. So there is a sort of triangle in this relationship between standards, patents, and intellectual and innovation, which are mutually influencing each other. So if I try to quickly go through the 3 sides of this triangle, the standardization and innovation. What are the correlations? Scott mentioned already this topic. Innovation, in fact, results in new technologies, but if you want these new technologies to become scalable, if you want to create an economy of scale, if you want to reduce the cost, at a certain time you need to try to find a standardization. And I will give an example of good and bad of standardization in Europe. In the healthcare domain, you will see that this is very critical in the way a company which is based in Europe can or not develop its activity. So standardization is a consequence of innovation to some extent, because if you don't standardize, you lack not only the economy of scale, but you lack the ability to build on the standards your application. Standards should be about what I call infrastructure. If I take an example of IT, the protocols of transfer of data has to be standardized. But everything you do on top of that, this is where you create your innovation as an enterprise. And this is where the standards are not needed. But you need to have an infrastructure. You need to have roads. You need to have plumbing to make sure that you can develop on top of that applications. And this is why standardization fosters innovation. Because when you have standards, then you have free access to patents that you have developed, or you give free access to other ones, or others have developed, and you have free access to these patents, because that's the rule of standardization. But then you can concentrate, focus your energy on developing new applications. And the new applications, of course, are normally serving the end user the best way we can. So this is this side of the triangle: standardization, innovation. Standardization, intellectual property, I mentioned already a little bit in the first minute of my presentation, but it's very important that standards deliver license-free patents. So it's a gift, it's an investment through patents in standards in order that you can leverage on this common open platform to develop your future applications. So patents and standardization go together. A standard is issued, is based on patents, and vice versa. From standardization, you can create your application patents, which are, of course, going to protect your, as a company CEO, your inventions for the future. And innovation and patents, I think, goes together, and I highlighted that in my previous slide. When is it that the standardization has to come in the lifetime of a product generation? This is the famous hype curve of Gartner. What is it saying? It says that when there is a technology, initially everything is good and you have a hype and you see only the good sides of the innovation, so it's the peak of inflated expectations. And then you start to discover the difficulties of doing things, doing it at the right cost, finding a market. Your competitor starts to have the same ideas. So this is what we call the disillusionment of the product creation. And then, of course, you start to get some level of maturity. You know how to develop the products. And this is the time to introduce standardization. That's the time where you need to create your basic patents. You need to have your competitors start to understand the same way. And then you can start what I call the standardization, because at the maturity level, the problem is no longer to have your basic patents. You need to create new applications, new way to use the products or the services to make sure that you can develop your market further and start to prepare the next wave. Another element I would like to highlight in this discussion, and I think it's important for the work group this afternoon, there are different ways of standardizing things. Scott mentioned the consensus, which I think it's the final goal, but you can reach the consensus by different ways. You can force the consensus. That means you have a de jure decisions in terms of standards to force applications into a market. If you look at the CE marking, for example, it's a way to force things. That's what I believe. If you look at the ASCII character set, this is forced. I don't think it works. I don't think it is the way it should work. The way I think it should work is to get the consensus, it has to be either coming from the consensus itself. That means there's a sort of obvious standardization which happens because different companies came to the same conclusion about the way to operate. Consensus, for example, is the JDF that we use in the graphics industry, which is the job description format. So if you want to print a newspaper, you better have the same way of printing images, making sure the colors are the same and having the same workflow. If not, you just cannot do it. And in all the world, it works on the same stuff because the industry players have de facto standardized this standardization as a consensus. The de facto, which is also leading to the consensus, I'll give you an example. MP3. MP3 is a de facto standard because when it has been established, that has been the standard de facto. To some extent, the SAP company in Germany has established a sort of de facto standard on the way we do the ERP of companies. And there are de facto standards like that. And I give you a point of discussion also for this afternoon. If you're an American company, and if you act on a market which has immediately 350 million potential users of your innovations, you very easily create a de facto standard. Because your customers speak the same language, English. If you take healthcare example, because I spent a part of my life in healthcare, you have the same medical system, you have the same medical practice, you have the same social payers. So it's pretty simple. And by the way, if you look at most of the innovation which have standardized de facto industries, look at .doc, Windows, Microsoft, look at the Facebook and these kind of companies, they all come from the US, and they will come from China in the next years. I fully agree with you. We have a joint venture in Shenzhen, and it's fantastic evolution, Shenzhen. And the Chinese, which were before copying our patents, they now create patents to protect their inventions, and they will lead the standardization. So these big markets, they have a de facto advantage on European companies, European markets, to create de facto standards. And that's why we need to act quickly. I say quickly because if it takes 10 years to standardize something between France and Italy and Germany, there are Americans and Chinese which have invented the standards before we have done that. So there is an urgent need that we create a really open market in Europe to make sure that we can benefit of a large-scale market ourselves. I promise I will give a few real examples of the Agfa life. So one example coming from graphics, or a set of examples coming from graphics. So graphics, what is it? It's basically, we are supplying consumables and machines to print everything which delivers information to you. Newspapers, books, magazines, billboards in the streets, information about Deleuze or Carrefour selling less expensive this product this month or whatever, point of sales. And these informations, they have to be processed. They have to be organized in a way that whomever delivers the printing press or whomever delivers the software message, the journalist proposing his photography or his text, it has to be printed in the same way, in the same format. So there is an important format at the beginning, which was PDF, that everybody knows. But PDF was created as initially an exchange of images or texts for business, for Soho, for the office, basically. And in this industry of graphics, we realized that very quickly the same problem will happen with digitization of images. That means when you create an image or a text from a from a computer, if you want to print that on a material, paper stuff, you need to standardize. And this is where we created what I call a de facto standard that we call JDF, the job definition format, where the big players of the industry, being Agfa, being Heidelberg, we defined a standard that we all used. And this is the JDF format. Another example of standardization in this industry is the color management. It's not a surprise for you that everywhere you look at, you have the same logo, the same color for the logo of whatever, BP or Coca-Cola or Agfa, and the same color, because this is completely standardized. So the way you assemble different basic colors and to reproduce a given color on different media, being a computer, being a newspaper, being whatever, is also standardized. And this is another example of the way standardization has helped developing a global business and making sure that we have an harmonized, in this case, in the case of logo, it's more marketing for companies, but it is important. It's important that you recognize your color through the chart of your definition. And I believe the next standards for the graphics industry will be everything which is related to the carbon impact, because this industry used to be pretty polluting, because basically, to make it simple, when you print a newspaper, you have first to establish a plate, aluminum plate, on which you have the material, which is photosensitive, and then you need to eliminate the photosensitive materials that you don't use to put the image in place. And on a newspaper, there is a lot of white page where there is nothing which is printed. And it was previously using solvents to remove that. After that, we moved to water, but it's a lot of waste of water. And now we move to completely dry techniques where, in fact, it's just brushing the plate, the part of the plate which is not going to be used. So this is the next big evolution of standardization in this industry. Now I move to healthcare, and to some extent, I would like to give you two examples. One which could be a positive impact of standardization. And for that, I will very quickly give you a quick lecture about radiology. What is it, radiology? You have a machine that we call in our jargon modality. It's an MRI, a CT scanner, an X-ray system, ultrasound. And this machine delivers a digital image. But the digital image is coming from a CT scanner with 300 different layers, or it's coming from an X-ray, so different techniques, different physical impacts, different media. It could be directly on a computer, it could be on a film in the traditional radiology, it could be on a plate, which is now what we use in the X-ray systems. So it comes from different modalities on different media. If you want to have the same diagnostic, if you want to have an image which is treatable in terms of informatics, an image which is processed in a global way, you need to standardize. And this industry has been able, this industry has been able very quickly in 1993 to establish a standard whose name is DICOM. Don't ask me the acronym because it's basically about digital image, DICOM communication. It's basically a standard which is both on the way the bits are written and on the way it is going to be processed, which completely defines images coming from any modality. And initially, it was not, the standard was not there, so the Philips, the Siemens, the GE, they were all creating their different images, and of course, they were limited to their own applications. And when the standard was created, immediately, of course, we had the possibility to treat any image, and this creates value for the end user, because if you have a standardized image, guess what? You can, for example, make what we call the fusion of images. That means if you operate a patient under ultrasound. Ultrasound, it's a technique which is real time, which is not using any X-ray or any dangerous radiation for the patient, so you can use it in real time. But unfortunately, if you are doing an operation behind a gas pocket in the body, for example, you don't see it because the ultrasounds are stopped. So guess what? You do first an image of the patient body at the same place where you want to operate with another technique, which is insensitive to the fact that there is gas somewhere. And then when you operate, you do a fusion, a superposition of the two images. And in fact, you have, through the software, because the images have the same format, you have the possibility to operate real time on an image which is not real time, because you see behind the pocket. So this is just an example of the way standardization can create value for the end users. Now we'll move to the counterexample, the lack of standardization and the problem. I take the example of what we call the clinical information systems. What is it? When you are a patient and you go to a hospital, you have to be connected as a patient to the different wards, different departments of the hospital. You need, of course, to be connected to your mutuality or your social security or your insurance. The hospital need to be connected also to the payer because you will receive money from the payer. Your invoice has to be sent to everybody. So there is a need for connecting the hospital to the inventory of drugs, to the pharmacy, to the laboratory, to the X-ray, to the etc. So all that is supported by intelligent software. What is happening? in Europe. Every country, sometimes every group of hospital, sometimes every hospital, defines its own way to standardize the way they work. The answer of the industry has been that today we have identified something like 1,000. The actual number is 986 vendors in Europe that we know, Agfa, of which we are one. And these vendors are ranging from people which are making €1 million of sales to people which are making 100 or 200 million euro of sales. It's absolutely impossible to be a player in more than maybe 2 countries, because the market size is not large enough, because you have a huge competition. By the way, the competition sometimes is against little companies which have been spin-offs of university hospitals. That means the product development has been for free, and these guys are answering official tenders with costs which are far below the real cost of developing, because the cost of R&D and innovation is more or less zero. So this is completely unfair, deregulated market, which is leading to, it's leading to the fact that Agfa suffers in this market, but this is not the basic equation of the problem. The basic equation is that it's a disaster for patient security, it's a disaster for interoperability, it's a disaster for the quality of care. If you have an accident somewhere, and if you go to a hospital, you're sure you will be cured with something which is different. So if you have been taken an image of your body somewhere, the image will be not known by everybody. If you have a disability or an allergy, if you don't wear that with you, it's over, it's lost. So this lack of interoperability, which is a consequence of a lack of standards in this domain, it's a disaster in terms of patient safety, I believe, and in terms of profitability of the European-based company.
Briefly now, if you would, Christian.
Yeah, and guess what? If you look at the US, the same situation, almost the same number of patients, but all speaking the same language. That means all being in the same situation. There are 2 or 3 companies which have emerged, and these companies are now doing what I call the European invasion. And they start to move into Europe because they have a lot of cash in their pockets. So Cerner just bought the IT system from Siemens. So there is no more Siemens. By the way, Siemens has sold to Intersystem their French activity. So Siemens disappears from so Europe loses one of their big players. There are 2 big players in Europe today in the system, Agfa and Siemens. Epic, which is a private company, is coming. McKesson, etc. So bad consequence of lack of standardization. And the lack of standardization, to come back to our discussion, Elena, yesterday, is not coming from the players. We would love to standardize. It's coming from the fact that the authorities, the regulators in the different countries, are prohibiting these kind of things to happen for whatever kind of competition reason. I will move fast because I passed my main message. A quick overview of what I would recommend as being the best practices for patents. First of all, they have to be defined as much as possible at a global level. I'm not saying we cannot develop standards at the level of Europe. Of course, we need to do it. But the reason why we need to develop standards at the level of Europe to enable the companies in Europe to be strong enough is to make sure that we can participate to the global standardization and voice Europe as a big market where we have large capabilities of standardization. The standards, a good standard must take all stakeholders. If I go back to my healthcare system, there is a good example which is called the Integration for Healthcare Enterprise, IHE, which is in fact taking the existing standards and involving all the stakeholders, being the hospitals, that means the care providers, being the patients, being the payers, being the industry vendors, because this is the good model to make sure that the standards are really applicable to the industry. I was mentioning the consensus and the interoperability. So in order to save time, interoperability, I think I can basically go very quickly on that. There are a few things which are taken into account, hopefully in Europe, in the development of the next years to come. In the US, Obama has launched the Meaningful Use program, but which is still missing for large part, the full interoperability system. So, but it is a bit specific to healthcare maybe, but standards must take into account the full interoperability globally. That's a general comment. And if I may, to the public authorities or the people which are mandated by the public authorities, I would recommend that we include, of course, in all standards, the minimum interoperability requirements. We provide financial incentives for people to use the standards. Again, I come back to my hospital problem. If hospitals were given incentives or punishment if they use or not standardized process and standardized interoperable standards, I think the situation could change a little bit. Involve all stakeholders. I think the rest I covered it for most of it. And I start to understand that I'm a bit late. So it's time to conclude.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. So, Christian, you started by saying you're a CEO, you're not an expert, but I think the very fact that a CEO is willing to take the time out to come and talk to us about how important this is says an awful lot. It's a very powerful message, and thank you for underlining the role of standards in fostering innovation, in that value creation, and that being a global player, to stop that European invasion you talked about. We're going to talk later
American
on.
invasion.
Also, we have a breakout later on the relationship between patents and standards and innovation. So that's an issue we will come back to. Thank you very much. We have about 5 minutes if anybody has a question for Christian. Does anybody want to, or a comment, as long as it's brief? Anybody want to come in at this point? Yes, hang on a second. Let me just come down to you. And please, could you say who you are and who you represent, because that's a help to our speakers. Thank you, sir.
Hello, my name is Edmund Gray. I'm here as part of NSAI, National Standards Association of Ireland delegation, and I'm involved in business messaging standards. So one of the key things we're doing through SEN is semantic interoperability. And I see on your slides you mentioned semantic interoperability. So I was just wondering how does that come into play in the healthcare systems?
Okay. Thank you. I'll come to you in a minute, Christian. Let me just see, in the interest of time, if there are any others. Anybody else? Otherwise, I have a question that I would like to ask you. Let's pick up on that very specific point about semantics first.
Yeah, semantic, thank you for asking the question, because I was so much pushed by Carrie that I could not develop this point. But yeah, semantic is part of this interoperability problem we have in the healthcare system. And there is a standard whose name is NOMAD, you may know it, which is basically the most developed international standards taking into account the vocabulary, the semantic, and in different languages that we, Agfa, try to push very hard, not only Agfa, but all the companies, most of the companies involved in this domain, but we are a bit slow in the standardization. I don't think it is it's not part of the lack of interoperability I was mentioning. That means there is goodwill on the semantic, but it's very complicated, very slow to implement because of technical reasons, I would say. That's the way we perceive it. But yes, semantic is a critical element of interoperability.
Thank you, Christian. We have another one here. Patrice.
Hi, Christian.
Yes,
it works. Christian, just one question. As we see, in the movie, in the short movie, as an introduction of this session, environmental issues now are turning as, let's say, a critical matter, for standards. How do you integrate, this issue, in your standardization process?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I mentioned that for graphics, where the carbon footprint is becoming more and more important. It's important to the point that the battle today in a mature industry like the offset pre-press industry is just around the carbon footprint. So the three big players of the world, Kodak, Agfa, and Fuji, we fight on introducing new products which are absolutely carbon-free in terms of utilization for our final customers. So the technology develops into these directions. For healthcare, I would say it's a different topic because the environmental aspects of healthcare are in essence, taken into account in the way we develop things. And as long as we develop IT, we are more in the traditional, we are good guys in terms of environment. We are supposed to be the good guys, the bad guys being the guys which have the data centers and these kind of things, which are polluting a lot, of course.
Christian, a last question in two parts, if I might. The title of your presentation referred to standards as the secret ingredient. My question is, if they are so central, if they are so core to many company strategies, why is it such a secret at the moment? I mean, do we need to do more to raise awareness? If you had one message to other companies who are not innovating about why to do it, what would it be? And secondly, a piece of advice, if you would, if there are innovators in this room, listening to what you say and thinking, I need to get in on that game, how should they start? So a key message to those who are not yet aware of the importance, and a bit of advice, if you would.
Okay, first, why is it so secret? It's because it's difficult to standardize. Because as I said, you need to find a way to make sure that your inventions, your innovation, is going to be standardized to help you develop a larger scale, but at the same time, you need to do it early enough. And we were discussing yesterday about pre-standardization, which I think is an important element. If you miss the disillusionment part of the curve, you're too late. Yeah. Because then you, as a company, think of applications and you think about your differentiation, and standards, by definition, is not about differentiation. So you need to standardize early enough. And when I come back to my past in telecom, I think the best example we can find is the way the mobile industry has been standardized. Yeah. The CDMA in the United States, the GSM in Europe, which has evolved to some extent to UMTS, and now there is 4G and everywhere. So this is a good example of the way standards have evolved, but introduced early enough to define platforms.
And your piece of advice to an innovator in this room?
Take patents.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, will you join me in thanking Christian Reinaudo very much indeed. We are very grateful to you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, before we move to coffee, I want to find out a little bit more about you all. What we're going to talk about later on, I mean, we have already heard there about the importance of standards for innovation, and this crucial question of, while most people now recognize the importance of innovation for competitiveness, there is less awareness of the importance of standards to drive and to support that innovation. So we're going to talk about how standards, talk more about how they help to support and foster innovation, what Christian was talking about, act as enablers, as Scott put it earlier, how innovators can use them as a tool to take advantage of these benefits. What are the barriers, if there are any? Christian just pointed to one there. And how can they best be overcome? But let's find out what you think. I want to know a little bit more about who you are and what you think. Don't worry, not difficult questions, not this early in the morning. Okay, first of all, let me see if I can get a sense of the room. It'll also help our panel later. I want to find out who you represent. If you are from industry or enterprises of any kind, private sector, can you put your hand up? Who's here from the private sector? Okay, sizable proportion of you. How many of you are researchers from a research organization? A little bit more than the industry. How many are from the world of standards? How many of you can't we teach anything today? You're going to teach us. Okay, that is great. And how many of you are others, policymakers, or anything else I haven't mentioned? Ah, excellent. Thank you very much. And one last question. We're in the Brussels bubble today. How many of you are part of that bubble, and how many of you are not from Brussels, have travelled in today? How many in the Brussels bubble, as it were? Okay. And how many from outside the bubble? Whoa, well, that's fantastic. It is great to see so many of you who are, sort of not necessarily new to Brussels, but here for today. Okay, a couple of questions about standards, and in a minute, if you've got them, otherwise we'll do it with hands if you can't find them, you're going to need your cards, but not for the first one. How many of you have actually worked with standards already, had contacts with standards body in any form, shape, or size? Okay. a lot of you, but not by any means all of you. If you haven't, or you've had contact but it hasn't really gone anywhere, and I've got 3 answers here. We'll have to do it with hands because you've only got 2 cards. You can answer to more than one of them. If you haven't so far, there are maybe three reasons why you might not have done so. There will be others possibly. You don't know enough about standards, so you're not really aware of how they can help you. How many might that be? You really need to know more to see their benefit. Okay? You don't see them as relevant to your work, or you haven't seen them until now as relevant. Anybody feel, I'm not convinced of the relevance of standards to what I do? A few there. And you feel, another possible, we heard from Christian, it's too difficult. You just feel it's too complicated, too time-consuming. It's just not going to work for you. Anybody feel like that? Okay, we have a couple of those as well. Now, with your cards, I want to see the extent to which our speakers today need to do a selling job on you. How many of you, and how many of you think, you use your green card if the answer to this question is yes, and the red card if it is no, do you think standards have an important role to play in supporting and stimulating innovation? If you think they do, a green card. If you think they don't or you're not convinced, a red one. Okay, well, we have some brave souls with their red cards. Thank you very much. Most of you are convinced, so as quite a lot of you haven't worked with standards before, it looks like our challenge speakers today is not to convince them that they need to do it, but perhaps more to convince them how to do it and how to overcome some of the obstacles, how to take advantage of that sophisticated system that Scott was talking about. If you think they are important, last question for now, if you think, as most of you do, that standards are important for innovation, do you think they are green, very important, or red, a factor, but there are many other things and we mustn't invest too much in them? So do you think they're very important, green, or quite important, but not the be-all and end-all? Okay, very mixed now, a very mixed pattern. So they are one element, I think, slightly by a majority. They are one element of the picture, but nevertheless an important one. So that's all for now. Might come back and ask you some questions later, and please do keep these cards because you will also be asked some questions in the breakout sessions. So if you could keep them about your person during the day, that would be great. We are going to break for coffee now for 30 minutes. Coffee is served outside. Could I ask you please also to begin, I mentioned the exhibition at the beginning. Please do go out and talk to the people on the stands. They can give you a lot of practical information. And Christian talked about successful examples and disaster areas without them. Please do go and talk to them. And please, when you hear the announcements, please do come back in here for our panel debate. I'll see you later on. Thank you very much.
Ready for love.